I want you to know that you've got this. Don't let nobody tell you any different. This is your world, and this is your life, so just live it. You deserve to be happy like everyone else. Look in the mirror, you've got this. I can't say it no clearer. You've got this. You can do it, you've got this. Just stay true, cause you've got this.
So first, Shireen Crow is autistic with ADHD and is the parent of an autistic ADHD child. As an autism ADHD coach and advocate, Shireen is a wealth of information with many resources and ideas. She's open to parents communicating with her, and Shireen's card with her contact information is on the table near where you all signed in. So next we have Jocelyn Maestas, who is autistic and the author of the blog Autistic and Teaching. She is one of the hosts of the autistic-led and run podcast, Autism Talk, Real Autistic Voices, led by real autistic women. Jocelyn is an ardent advocate for autistics. As both an autistic adult and a teacher, Jocelyn strives to bring together two worlds where autism acceptance is key and the autistic community is heard. Misty McCulloch is autistic and employed in a managerial capacity in the medical field. She is an articulate advocate for autistic adults and is acutely aware of issues particularly facing autistic people in the workplace.
One of the main things that people that are autistic say, that the reason why they like identity first language is because they're autistic no matter where they go. They don't leave their autism at home and forget it one day and they're like, oh, I'm not autistic today. And then they're not with autism. Autism doesn't come with them. They are autistic. They can't forget it at home. They can't say, oh, today I'm just going to be normal. And my autism bag that I carry around half the time or all the time, I'm just going to forget it today. I'm going to leave it at home with my other shoes and bags and stuff. I'm just going to forget it today.
And it can be even challenging to raise an autistic child if you're not autistic, because you don't understand where they're coming from. So I wonder if you as panelists could each speak to how it was for you growing up with your parents. What were your experiences?
Well, for me it was, I was a late diagnosis, so I wasn't even diagnosed until 34. So they just, growing up I was just known as quirky, little different, shy, things like that. And I'm not even sure if my parents completely understand it now, but there's definitely a lot more information out there now than there was, which is really good as far as like reading about it and things like that. So I know like my mom is educating herself on what autism even is, which is cool. But yeah, growing up for me it was just it wasn't really as much of a trying to find a cure as just I was known as being different.
I'm with an adult diagnosis as well, but my parents actually already, it was well known that I was not the child that they wanted, not because of a label that I had, but because of being different, and I know that it definitely had an effect, knowing that you're not who they want for whatever reason.
I was diagnosed as a child in second grade, and there wasn't a lot of information because I was diagnosed early 90s about autism. The very few information that was out there was pretty scary, and luckily I had a doctor who told my mom, don't look at the information. You need to listen to me, not to listen to the entire world. He told her that she should protect me from what others are going to think, because a lot of what people think at that time was not very nice and it was very ableist. Mm-hmm. And he recommended her not even telling the school because of the ableism that would go on in the school system, and that they would do anything that I needed outside of school. And I think with my parents, they tried to have children for about 5 years before they ended up with me. So I grew up knowing I was a miracle from the time I was a baby till even now. My mom still tells me that I'm a miracle, because to her, it didn't matter what kind of child came out. She was going to love that child because she wanted that child.
But my daughter has been diagnosed with autism, and she's 15. She was diagnosed at like 13 or 14, and she's had a lot of problems through schools and getting rejected, a lot of rejections and behavioral issues. She wants so badly right now, as a 15-year-old freshman in high school, to have a friend, to have a best friend. And she doesn't really know about how to go about and do it. She can make friends very easily, but she can't keep them. How can I help her to make friends that are lasting friends? It's like I've asked her, do you want to tell them about that you have autism so that they can understand? Or maybe we can, teach them something about it.
What my doctor and my mom ended up doing, because that it really bugged me that my mom had a best friend since she was in almost elementary school, like middle school, elementary school, and they're still best friends today. And it really bugged me because I could never make that kind of friendship. I still never have had that type of friendship. My dad and my mom knew each other and they were friends since they were 3. So it took a lot for me to realize that not having friends that are long lasting doesn't mean that I didn't have friends. Like I had a friend who was in one of my classes and she was my friend in that class. I had a friend who was my friend in art club. I had a friend who was my friend in skating. And even though those friendships didn't go past the doors, and it was still a friendship. And I had to understand that first. And I did end up making friends in things like writing. I had a online writing club my mom signed me up for, and I've had a friend since I think 8th grade that I still talk to, and we've never met because she also is autistic and she lives in another state. So making it known that different types of friendships exist and they're all okay, I think that helped me a lot, because I don't think I will ever have a friendship like my mom had, or my brother who's had a in-person friendship, just because I have different disabilities, and it's, I don't know. It was hard for me to make friendships, at least as a kid.
Especially, in that peer group, and you see what these friendships are. So being able to open your daughter to the idea that there are many different types of friendships. She doesn't have to follow, and probably can't follow, the neurotypical or non-autistic way of doing it, because she's not. But there may be avenues where she can have a friend who does a certain activity with her, and it's the activity that joins them together. Or there could be a pen friend like Jocelyn had, or there could be an older friend. Jocelyn, I think you talked about when you volunteered at the old person's home.
The Jewish retirement home. Yeah.
Right, and so to try and express that it's okay to have these different types of friendships. She might be friends with an old person, for example, and find a real connection there.
I actually ran into a classmate of mine from high school who is in a autism teacher group, and it's quite funny because I mentioned I felt ostracized, and she goes, I don't think I ever ostracized you. I talked to you a lot. I'm like, yeah, but you never asked me to hang out. And she's like, because you never asked me. So I just didn't understand the social cues. So I thought them not asking me to hang out was them bullying me, and they thought, as neurotypicals, me not wanting to hang out, or they're like say, hey, you want to hang out with me, they thought, as she phrased it, they thought I was a bitch. So I just didn't understand, them, and they didn't understand me, and we just had this communication barrier. So
I would suggest looking into like interest based. With my son, he either gets along really well with those older than him by a few years, or under him by a few years. And he wants that type of friend too. And one thing that's helped is finding interest-based things that he can do with people, because then it's not as a parent that the differences as there are in other social situations. So to find something that she enjoys doing, and encourage her to join groups, maybe go online if you're comfortable with that. And doing research of some of the different groups out there. And then the other thing that my son has expressed interest in doing is like Boy Scouts. And I know they have different things, like Big Brother, Big Sister programs, because I think it won't necessarily look the same having a best friend, but I do think it's important that they have somebody there. And I found it helpful as a child to have someone outside of the situation that was reliably around.
I mean, it was challenging to keep friends. I always had like a friend, but more than one is where it always got complicated. And I think just part of the learning social cues and those kind of things is what became challenging. But I always had like one person, like one like best friend or whatever I considered a best friend at that time. Keeping a best friend though was always a challenge, just because of all the protocol of like having to touch base with them. There's a lot of upkeep with friendships that I don't think maybe autistic people need as much of. So if I find that as that stuff slides, the friend starts to wander away.
Right.
And then I just grab a new friend. And that's kind of been my whole life. I don't really have a lot of good, I wish there was a solid answer for how to get a best friend and keep them. But
If you find it, let me know.
right. I mean, I think it's maybe a challenge with autistic people in general. But I know I've used Meetup, that group, because I have dogs. I have a Chihuahua. So I would go on to Meetup before COVID and all that stuff happened, and I would just hang out with other Chihuahua owners. And we would meet at the dog park and stuff like that. I even created a meetup for that that people would go to. So things like that are cool, but it is definitely will be a challenge. I think, just because of female and autistic, it's just maybe one of the things that comes with it. Is just the challenge of having and keeping long-term, good, high-quality friendships.
Right.
I think.
Go ahead.
I think what bugged me as a kid is I didn't understand best friends. I thought best friends were like Disney movies, where like you only had one best friend.
Right.
So when I would have a friend I considered my best friend, and they would call me best friend. They would say BFF forever on their little notes they would pass me in class every once in a while. But then they would call someone else their best friend.
Right.
And I was like, wait, I thought I was your best friend. I'd get really jealous.
Yeah.
And like territorial.
Especially as a teenager.
Right.
It was really
And
bad, yeah.
I didn't realize, like, now as a teacher, I see them calling themselves that, and I'm like, oh, that must.
Right, like everyone must somehow. But
Yeah.
I definitely took it, me too, more like, I'm the one best friend, and then there'd be like, they'd say it to someone else, and I'm like, wait a minute. What the? Oh man, and it would like get me fuming, so then I'd be like, that's it, you are no longer my friend. I'm finding a new one.
You just divorced me, okay?
One thing I think too that helped me as I got older was learning some of the social cues, learning about them, not necessarily to change the way I act, but to at least be able to explain that how I act is different. And that has helped me, because then, like they said about upkeep, without it, it's so easy for those relationships to be fleeting. So I really think learning more about autism herself so that she can help advocate for herself with people. And so, like, I have ADHD, and I find it difficult to do certain things, and rather than keep trying, I'll just explain, hey, this is why what I'm doing is the way it is, because I learned it's not necessarily what you do or don't do, but it's what expectations people have and whether or not you're meeting them or not. So just being able to change the expectation can sometimes help build her self-esteem to where she's okay being herself. And what occupational therapy does is it can give tools, but it never says, here's what you should be doing. It's saying, here are options and tools and how to advocate for yourself.
My daughter is very confrontational. She's very aggressive, and I'm not. I run away from confrontation. Like the other day, she screamed in the car, and I was not expecting it, and it hurt. It hurt my ear. Mm-hmm. And I told her, please don't do that. That really hurts. We're in a car. And then she did it again, like 10 minutes later, and I put my fist up. I'm like, just stop. That really hurts. And she took this to be that I was threatening her. And I was on the highway, and she punches me really hard in my arm. I can't deal with these behaviors. I don't know what to do. Yeah.
Well, I can appreciate your situation, mm-hmm. and I'm not saying that you don't need to deal with the situation. My concern is ABA just typically focuses on the behavior, mm-hmm. and yes, it can, what they call, extinguish the behavior. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to lie to you. They can give you, in the short term, the results you want, but because you're basically manipulating out the response you want, it's never permanent, and it doesn't really deal with the root of the problem, which is emotional dysregulation, which might be physical dysregulation. My main concern with extinguishing the behavior without dealing with the trigger is that you're taking away her way of coping. Mm-hmm. If you don't replace it with something else, mm-hmm. who knows what she's going to replace that with. So I think if she's emotionally dysregulated, that can cause a lot of the problems. But that's all the more important that you deal with the root of the problem rather than trying to just change the end result. The explosive child, which isn't just for explosive kids, but it basically says that kids do well when they can, and that if they're not doing well, it's due to lagging skills, it's due to issues, and it's how do we collaborate together rather than being confrontational. It's exactly like what you're saying you want, and it really goes through and helps you break down, this is the behavior, but behavior is communication, so what is this communicating to me, and how can I help that?
And make sure she's getting her support at school, because if it's happening after you pick her up at school, the likelihood is that she didn't get the support at school. Now she's in meltdown mode, and she's been trying to hold off because she hasn't been able to regulate or do her regulation. I hear from a lot of parents on my blog that their child doesn't get it, or that the school's like says, oh, they get 20 minutes of break, so they chunk it in all at the end. Oh, there's your 20 minutes worth of break. That's not how it was supposed to work. It's supposed to work when they need it, not, oh, here's your chunk of break all at the end.
Are you the only people that she explodes toward?
Mostly.
Because that often means you're her safe place.
Mm-hmm.
You're
Yes.
the place she feels I don't have to hold it together anymore.
Right.
And I used to be, I could hold it together for years and years. But then as soon as I had the opportunity to let it loose, it all came out, because it's hard to regulate it all at once.
And I very much got the message, oh my God, I'm so defective. I'm such a problem. I'm just so broken. And the idea to maybe rewrite that script and let her know, you're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. You're autistic.
Yep.
There's a wonderful reading that we do at Wilderwood called Sparrows and Penguins. And it talks about how, this penguin has grown up in this colony of sparrows believing that he's defective because he can't fly and he, doesn't like to do what others do. And then one day he finds out there's nothing wrong with you. You're just not a sparrow. You're never going to fly. So, because a meltdown, the stuff that you describe with the hitting and the anger, that doesn't come out of nowhere. That is building up and building up and building up, and it could be sensory issues. Do the fluorescent lights bother her? Are the noises bothering her? These things can build up and build up to the point where you just can't take it anymore, and you explode. And as Shireen said, you may be her safe people. The one place where she feels, if I do this, I'm not going to be abandoned or walked out on, or, my parents are still going to love me. That's why it might be happening with you.
Yeah, I would close the door, or throw everything off my shelves, throw everything off my bed. I just kept chunking everything around my room. And finally I would calm down, and she would come in and she'd ask me if I was done, and I was like, yeah. And she's like, you want to clean? And I'm like, nope. And then she would start cleaning my room. And then I would watch her, and I'd feel guilty that she's cleaning my room after I just destroyed it. And then I would slowly get up and I'd start cleaning, and then my brother would peep his head in and goes, y'all need help? So it was the safe place to be. I haven't done that in a long time, but I've also learned what were my triggers, and back then I didn't know what the triggers were. Most of my triggers had to do with kids and how they were treating me at school. And if it was a particularly hateful day at school where they were just at me all day, that it would cause me to have a meltdown, because I didn't understand that it's okay to be weird. It's okay to be different. It's okay to be those things. And
One thing I might suggest that you try, and I did this successfully with my own child who was autistic, when she's behaving like that, maybe try pressure, holding her, and say, I love you, I'm proud of you.
Try to have tools for her, and help teach her tools of how to deal with the things before it builds up so much. She might find online resources that can help her feel more connected. And there are some books that go into the what it's like to be autistic adult, because I found, for me, knowing what was my normal would have been really helpful. I did volunteering when I was a teenager as well, and it was just at a place like this where they had horses, and they said, we'll teach you to ride if you'll clean up around the barn. And there were lots of little interactions with people, and the one thing that stands out from it all is that it was never from my age group. But I realized I didn't care, because I was getting the social interaction that I was looking for.
Right.
So maybe you can't give her a best friend, but maybe you can help fulfill those social needs in different ways.
And I also liked reading to children, because I loved reading. So, like, the library had this program where you could read to little kids that were struggling readers, and I would sit there and I would read to them, and they taught me how to, slow down and sound out the words with them. Probably why I'm a teacher. So, doing little volunteer things were like my happy place as a kid.
I do wonder, with those of you that weren't diagnosed until you were older, what are things that you wish your parents, or maybe even your teachers, would have noticed that they didn't catch when you were kids?
I grew up with the understanding that I was different. With that knowledge and understanding that I was different, nobody believed me about stuff. It was, I was always the oddball out. Well, that's not the way it goes. That's not how people are, or that's not really how you feel, or compared to others and found lacking. And if one person growing up could have said, no, she knows what she's talking about, it's her body, it's herself, your son is often going to be the best resource about your son. Because I can tell you what my triggers are, they can tell you what their triggers are, but knowing what triggers your son has, as much as you can find out from him about his triggers, and then some of it's just going to be a trial by fire. And then if his focus is a problem, ADHD is often diagnosed along with autism. My son is autistic and ADHD, and he just turned 11, and a lot of the things that you mentioned are things that he deals with. And occupational therapy helps. He's come a long, long way with that. Whatever it is, just giving him tools of how to cope with it. So for me, if the lights bother me, if all the people and the noise bother me, well, I'll put on sunglasses or my hat, and I'll put in earbuds or earplugs or noise-canceling headphones or listen to music. But the other thing that helps me personally is bathrooms. They are a great place to go hide away for a few minutes in public where it's away from the crowd. Take regular timeouts where you go out to the car or he goes to the restroom or something where he can just have a few minutes to decompress after that. Whereas if you wait until he's already overwhelmed, it's much harder to do, as I'm sure you know.
A lot of autistics like the online because, one, they can concentrate better because they don't have the ruckus of the classroom, and then they also like it because they're able to step out or turn off their camera if there's something that they're not.
Yeah, that's not in your environment.
Musicians' earphones, I use them
Earplugs,
out. They're earplugs. You can't even tell that they're in. I use them at work all the time, and they basically take certain decimal points of sound and lower it away. Like I can still hear when people are talking, but all the background noise that I can hear right now because I don't have them in
Cuts it out.
goes away, and it makes me, because by the end of the day, if I don't have them in, I'm extremely irritated without even realizing it. The littlest thing will set me off, and I'm just all of a sudden, but it's because of a whole day of listening to everything.
Yeah.
So the musicians' earplugs have been a game changer for me.
What we call wiggle stools. It's like a stool that kind of has a circular bottom, and they kind of go like this.
One of the learning places.
Yeah. So the kids really like that. Even the neurotypical kids they fight over who gets to have the wiggle that day.
They also have little, they call them little exercise things, or little cushions. It's air, and they sit on it, and it engages their core, which is good.
Yep.
You can also get ball chairs, so it's a chair, and it has the thing, and then it's just a ball sitting on it.
Yep. I had a yoga ball in my classroom my first year, so the kids also like that. It didn't have the chair, but it was the ball, the same concept of the ball. And they liked it because it, moved around, and if they had to go do groups, you would see them scooting on the ball across the classroom. So
You can also sit on a horse, and that's really beautiful as well.
My son specifically, if he's not engaged and interested in something, it's really hard to keep his attention. And one thing was allowing him to have something to fidget with. And we actually went through some different tools and techniques and toys and fidgets for him to let him kind of figure out what works best for him. They've got little bands that connect to the feet of the chairs that they can mess with. And then what the occupational therapist said about my son was like, getting him to sit all the way through dinner was unrealistic. So have him sit for 10 or 15 minutes, let him go outside for 2 minutes to run around, and then come back and finish it. And that's just been incorporated as a reasonable expectation because that's what he needs.
And a lot of the kids in my classroom will opt to stand because they can't sit still. The wiggle doesn't work for them, but standing for some reason works.
We just process differently. And I think the sort of the general thing that's come out of this discussion tonight is it can be really hard to understand why we do stuff, and like you were saying, why you sort of sit there and do this, or why we're melting down, and it's like, oh man, it's come out of nowhere, but it hasn't. If you can try to see the world the way we see it, it might help you to react in ways that are better for both of you.
Yep.
If your son recognizes, hey, I'm feeling this way, the sooner he can recognize it, the sooner he can advocate for himself and deal with it. Because it's not when it explodes that the problem needs dealt with.
We are way before that.
Yeah.
If you tell them, I'm calling home because they're misbehaving, it doesn't matter what. If you did it first period, if you did it second period, third period, didn't matter which period happened. The rest of the day, they know they're in trouble when they get home, so might as well go down. I'm going down that rabbit hole, and I'm going.
Yep. And there's no saving. I can't get back. Yep. Exactly. That is a very autistic mindset. But there's a lot of things that bother us, and we know that you don't get it. Crowded restaurants, people being too close, and too much bright light. Read as much as you can about autism, so that you understand it. And then let your child read about it too. This is his or her condition, and these are his people. We are his people. And try to get her or him involved. I know it's hard when they're younger, but let them know that they're okay. There's also this black and white thinking too. We tend to be perfectionists.
Yep.
We want to be perfect, or forget it.
Yep. My mom says I see no gray.
Yeah, and that can be an issue too. So helping your child deal with the fact that it's okay not to be perfect. If you're learning something, you're expected to not be perfect, and that doesn't diminish your value or your worth at all. Encourage them to see that gray can be very helpful too.
If you can teach them to compare themselves, if they have to themselves, rather than to other people. That's been really important for my son, because compared to everybody else, he always feels inferior, and I was the same way. But compared to myself, I can see the growth I have made. Yeah, and maybe even starting like a gratitude or positivity thing, like a one thing I did well today or something like that reinforces those positives, because self-esteem really can be an issue.
Too, about something that we talked about at Wilderwood actually this last month was the executive function and getting overwhelmed to the point of shutdown or meltdown, not being able to do anything. In that instance, it can be really helpful to say, just do one thing. Doesn't even matter what it is. It doesn't matter what it is. Just do one thing. And that can take all the pressure off. It can take the pressure away of being overwhelmed. And when that one thing is done, it can be motivation enough to say, oh, I did that. Okay, now I can do something else. Because it really, that is an autistic characteristic, to become overwhelmed to the point that you can't even function.
Break it down into steps. I know a lot of kids that works for. Okay, you're going to do step 1 and 2, and I will give you 5 minutes, and we'll come back and we'll do the next couple steps. So, okay, that seems like it'll work. Great.
Yeah, and the action of moving, of doing something, can also help mitigate a meltdown or a shutdown too.
Transitions are often difficult for autistics, and for my son, transitions were an issue until we started doing like a heads up countdown. So in 10 minutes, here's what you're going to do. in 5 minutes, here's what you're going to do. You have 2 minutes left, and he's gotten better at self-managing for the final one, going from a preferred activity to a non-preferred activity, because it's like, even as an adult, you don't want to stop something you enjoy doing.
Right.
So if there are good transition times and even pauses where everybody just stops for a few minutes in the car before going into a restaurant or a mall, and just taking a few minutes to calm down before doing it.
But what I struggle with still today is, say, like, something happens where, I don't know, it's raining and we were supposed to go out for PE, and it was something that was on the agenda. We're not going out for PE. Yeah, I know it's raining, it's hailing, and there's a tornado siren going.
Drizzling. We can still do it.
We can do it. But even as an adult, like, if something gets canceled and I had pepped myself up for it the whole day and I was excited for it because I've been pepping myself up, I struggle with, oh, it's not happening? Okay. It sucks, and I'm going to mope about it and complain about it this whole time, but...
I find it helpful with my son to have a plan B. So here's what we're aiming for. If this doesn't work out, here's one thing that will be the same no matter what.
Yep.
So we look at, okay, this is falling through, and maybe most everything else is, but you can still listen to an audiobook tonight before bed. Or we'll still do this. So it's especially if it's something that they're looking forward to.
Like Six
Having
Flags.
having a letdown plan. If who knows what, it's because some of it is an anxiety over my plans fell through, now what? So already knowing ahead of time what that plan B is helps my son and I feel more prepared when that happens.
So, do you have any last questions for us before we kind of wrap up for the evening?
I guess what is something a neurotypical person who does see social skills, who does see somebody that seems to be struggling, what are things you can do to help that person? Like, what is, if I invite you to my home, or if I'm at a restaurant, or I'm at a business?
Having patience, because it doesn't matter whether someone is neurotypical or not. If they're struggling, and to, if somebody is like, if I'm talking to someone and I can tell they're struggling, I'll reassure them, like, take your time, I'm not in a hurry.
Oh, yeah.
Because I often feel rushed to get done what I'm doing, to get done what I'm saying, to get through quickly, and knowing that I can slow down and take the time to stop and breathe and collect my thoughts, and that I'm not feeling rushed is really helpful. And just to let them know that you're happy to accommodate if they have any such needs.
Right. One thing that people think is that autistic people don't feel anything, that we're kind of, alienated and sort of like robots. But the truth is actually the inverse. We feel things incredibly intensely, sometimes to the point that we can't communicate. So I know if I'm in a social situation and I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling like I'm really awkward, I'm feeling lousy about myself because I know people are looking at me like I'm the weird one. So if you can go up to that person and just acknowledge me, talk to me, say, hi, how you doing? I think this is a great event, and I'm really glad that you're here. That can really go a long way in terms of alleviating those acute feelings of, I'm weird, I know I'm weird, and people are looking at me and I feel uncomfortable and I want the world to just swallow me up and I don't belong here. And just reassure that person, you belong here, exactly the way you are.
And respect them, like their needs. Like, I've told my dad's family multiple times I don't like to be hugged. And what do they do every single time I go to one of their events? They come up to me and they hug me, and then I remind them kindly, please don't touch me, I don't like being hugged. And they're like, well, we're a hugging family, you're gonna get hugged.
Yeah.
And then they get upset with me. Like, when I was a teenager, I remember I purposely made it a plan in my mind. I'm going to dodge every single hug. I'm going to dip underneath every single arm. I'm going to run away from them each time they try. And when I'm sitting with my brothers, one of my aunts came up behind me and bear hugged me without me knowing she was coming behind me. Because, like, one, you saw this child running away each time someone tried hugging him. Two, she dodged underneath your arms already 3 times. You think that's a hint enough to not hug this person. And then you get insulted when you bear do it and then they go like this and hit you. Like, there were the signs. Don't touch.
Don't touch. We hope to see you next month, or hope to see some of you next month. Thank you.